Welcome to Her Remarkable History. Remember, to support our channel, please subscribe. Why did England execute children? Over the centuries in England, crime and punishment could be seen as being rather sadistic. During the Tudor period, for example, Henry VIII ordered the executions of over 70,000 people during his reign, and his daughter, Bloody Mary, even burnt Protestants at the stake for their religious beliefs. This was the sentence for heretics, and for treason it would result in a defendant being hung, drawn and quartered. But many executions shocked the public. For example, during Henry's reign, some of his closest advisers such as Thomas Cromwell and Sir Thomas More were beheaded on Tower Hill, and even 2 of his wives were executed inside the walls of the Tower of London. But disgustingly, over the centuries, there have been some even more shocking executions, which saw children going to their deaths on the gallows or on the scaffold. England's dark history with capital punishment contains a number of young children being publicly killed in front of large crowds. Following the Tudor period, there were a number of accounts that recorded child executions. There were many crimes that you could lose your life for, and there are accounts that show many children who were executed for committing crimes such as theft. Today we believe that theft is a lower class of crime when compared with murder or manslaughter, but during the 17th and 18th century, scores of people were executed for this. It was said that the law did not take age into account, and that children and teenagers did know the difference between right and wrong. Because of this, the age for criminal responsibility was just 7, meaning that a 7-year-old could be killed in front of a crowd for stealing goods. It was deemed that girls would be executed for more serious crimes such as arson or being complicit in murders, but boys were executed for more crimes. John Dean has gone down in history as one of the youngest boys ever executed in England. He was around 8 or 9 years of age and was sentenced to death for arson. Whilst at trial at the Abingdon Assizes on the 23rd of February 1629, it was said that John Dean set fire to 2 houses, barns or dwellings in Windsor. The judge, Mr. Justice Whitelock, stated he had evidence that John knew what he was doing, and that he knew his arson attack was wrong, and because of this he was criminally responsible. He was then executed and was hanged publicly for committing arson. During Henry VIII's reign, Alice Glaston, just an 11-year-old girl, was executed in Shropshire. She was considered the youngest girl ever to be executed and sentenced to death by the legal system in England. It's not known what she did to be sent to the gallows, and she was executed alongside 2 others on the 13th of April 1546. Another couple of children who were hung were Michael Hammond and his sister Anne, whom it's believed were only 7 and 11 when they went to the gallows. In the historical account, it was said that they were a small boy and girl, but some records claim they could have been teenagers. The pair were hung at King's Lynn in 1709 for a crime that isn't stated. There was a problem at the time, as teenager executions often weren't reported. In 1740, 16-year-old William Jewell was hanged along with 4 others at Tyburn, the infamous site of execution in London, where people were hung, drawn and quartered in front of large crowds. Jewell was accused of murdering a woman or girl, and following his execution, his remains were then used for medical dissection and scientific experiments. His body was cut down after the hanging, and after he was declared dead, and he was then taken away by surgeons. However, something was wrong. When he was taken to the surgeons, he had somehow managed to revive, and he was alive. He was one of the only few who somehow had managed to survive his death sentence. Because he had undergone his sentence, he was not hung again, and was instead revived by the doctors before he was sent to Australia to work in the colonies. It was mostly for crimes of great severity that saw teenagers condemned to die. Murder was more common than you'd think in the 18th century, and in 1794 in Dorchester in southern England, a 15-year-old girl was brought out in front of a crowd to be hung. Elizabeth March was charged with killing her grandfather, and 2 days after she was found guilty and she was killed. The sentence was not carried out immediately, as the execution could not take place on a Sunday, as it was considered a day of rest, and because of this her death sentence was delayed, but only by a day. She was kept in chains, locked up, and was fed only bread and water before she was publicly hanged inside the tower. Following her death, her remains were then passed across yet again to the surgeons, as at the time they were allowed to dissect the bodies of those who were condemned for medical science. But more executions of children continued, even through the 1800s. Those whom were considered today to be minors were still sent to their deaths. Adolescents between the age of 15 and 18 were executed for crimes such as murder, arson, theft and highway robbery. In 1831, John Bell, who was 14, was executed for murdering a boy who was 13. John and his brother, who was 11 at the time, murdered Richard Taylor. They did this to steal from him a sum of 9 shillings, which he at the time was trying to collect to give to his disabled father who was struggling. So the boys killed him to steal his money also, and then following their trial, John was executed. But he was executed using the new drop scaffold, using a slightly different method, rather than simply being hung over a gallows. It's considered that in the 1800s, John Bell's execution was the youngest person to be hung, but he wasn't the youngest to be sentenced to death, as a young boy aged 9 was condemned, but the public hated this, and it caused so much chaos that the judge had to change the sentence. Usually, executions were done in public sites such as town halls or market squares, but many were also performed from the walls and ramparts of castles or other buildings. For example, at Lincoln Castle, a number of people were executed from the roof of one of the towers. The whole point of this was to ensure that people of a town saw that justice was administered, but as time went on, the use of public executions began to attract criticism. It was said that crowds began to act poorly, and that the grisly deaths were then forced to be performed in private, for example, in prison execution chambers, away from the eyes of the public. As time went on, the age for execution went up, but in the late 1800s, 18 boys younger than 19 had been executed. But then the Children's Act of 1908 outlined the minimum age for executions must be 16. This was still far too low for many people, but there wasn't any records of those under the age of 18 being executed during the 1900s. But there were some 18-year-olds condemned. The final child to be given a death sentence was Harold Wilkins, a young 16-year-old boy who had been implicated in a murder. However, he was spared because of his age, and then the age of execution was raised to 18. In the 1900s, 7 teenage girls had been sentenced to death, but all of these received some form of different sentence, for example, prison time. The children executions of England were incredibly shocking and brutal, but what is amazing is that they occurred a lot closer to the modern world than you'd think. Imagine if you were doing your everyday duties in the Tudor period or later, and you happened to walk past a scaffold with a child saying his last words before he was due to be killed. It would have been incredibly shocking, but what is disgusting is the fact that crowds still attended the executions of children en masse, and still bayed for the blood of those who were condemned, despite some being so young. The stories of these children show us that Britain was incredibly bloody and that England has a past that must be considered. The child executions of England are a part of history that communicates how awful people can be sometimes. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.